If you truly understood what 90 days could do to your life, you wouldn't be procrastinating right now. You would already be on day one. Because the truth is, wealth doesn't begin in your bank account. It begins in a place most people avoid looking at: the silent patterns of your own mind. And according to Buddhist philosophy, the life you're living today is nothing more than the accumulation of what you have repeatedly thought, felt, and done. There is something almost uncomfortable about this idea, because it removes excuses. It means your current reality isn't random, and it isn't luck. It is the result of cycles, mental, emotional, and behavioral, that have been repeating for far longer than you realize. And the 90-day rule is not magic. It is simply the time required to interrupt these cycles and replace them with something intentional. In Buddhism, there is a concept known as samsara, the endless loop of unconscious repetition. Most people wake up, think the same thoughts, react the same way, make the same decisions, and then wonder why nothing changes. The problem is not effort, it is unconscious repetition. And what makes this dangerous is that it feels normal, comfortable, familiar. But here's where everything shifts. When you decide that for 90 days, you will no longer act automatically. You begin to observe your thoughts instead of obeying them. You start choosing your actions instead of reacting to impulses. And slowly, almost invisibly, something begins to reorganize inside you. Not in a dramatic way, not overnight, but in a quiet, undeniable transformation that builds day after day. And this is why most people never become rich. Not because they lack intelligence or opportunity, but because they never escape the invisible loop. They try to change outcomes without changing patterns. They chase results without disciplining the mind that creates those results. But the moment you understand this, the game changes. Because now, the next 90 days are no longer just time. They become a doorway. Most people believe they are in control of their lives, but what they are really controlling is anxiety. And this is one of the most subtle traps described in Buddhist philosophy: the illusion of control driven by attachment to outcomes. You think you're working toward success, toward money, toward a better life, but deep down, what you're actually doing is trying to force reality to match your expectations. And this is where suffering begins. In Buddhism, this is called tanha, craving, the constant desire for things to be different than they are. You want faster results, more recognition, immediate change, and because of that, you become emotionally dependent on outcomes you cannot fully control. You work, but with tension. You act, but with fear. You move, but with resistance. And ironically, this is what blocks progress. Because when your mind is attached to results, it cannot fully commit to the process. Think about it. How many times have you started something with intensity, only to abandon it when results didn't come fast enough? How many times have you felt frustrated, not because you weren't improving, but because improvement wasn't visible yet? This is not lack of discipline. This is attachment sabotaging consistency. The Buddhist path teaches something radically different. Act without attachment. Focus on the action, not the reward. Build the habit, not the expectation. Because when you detach from the outcome, something powerful happens. Your energy stabilizes. You stop negotiating with your effort. You stop quitting emotionally before the results arrive. And this is where the 90-day transformation becomes real. Because if you can spend 90 days acting without needing immediate proof, without demanding visible rewards, without feeding the constant hunger for validation, you begin to access a different level of discipline. A quieter one, a more dangerous one.
The kind that doesn't depend on motivation, only on decision. And in that state, wealth stops being something you chase and starts becoming something you build. There is a moment, usually around the first weeks, when motivation fades. And this is exactly where most people lose. Not because the method doesn't work, but because they were never relying on the right force to begin with. Motivation is emotional. It fluctuates. It depends on how you feel. But what transforms your life in 90 days is something far less exciting and far more powerful. Conscious habit. In Buddhist philosophy, there is a deep understanding that every repeated action leaves an imprint on the mind. This is often described as karma, not as punishment or reward, but as conditioning. Every thought you repeat, every action you reinforce, becomes easier to repeat again. And slowly, without noticing, you are not building habits. Your habits are building you. This is why discipline, when done correctly, is almost invisible. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like doing the same simple thing again and again and again, especially when you don't feel like it. And this is where most people misunderstand the process. They are waiting for intensity, for clarity, for certainty. But transformation is built in repetition, not in peaks of motivation. The idea of the 90 days is not to change your life overnight. It is to become the type of person who no longer negotiates with their own actions. Someone who wakes up and does what must be done, regardless of mood, regardless of external validation, regardless of immediate results. And at first, this feels unnatural, almost forced. But that's because your old patterns are still stronger. Then something subtle begins to happen. The resistance decreases. The action becomes lighter. The habit no longer feels like effort. It starts to feel like identity. And this is the real turning point. Not when your results change, but when your behavior becomes consistent without internal conflict. Because at that moment, you are no longer relying on discipline. You have become disciplined. And from that point forward, wealth is no longer a possibility. It becomes a consequence. There is something most people never realize. They don't fail because they lack discipline. They fail because their attention is constantly being stolen. And in Buddhist philosophy, this is not slucheinist. It is the natural state of an untrained mind. A mind that jumps from desire to desire, from distraction to distraction, without ever settling long enough to build anything meaningful. This is what Buddhists describe as the monkey mind. Restless, impulsive, always searching for something new, something easier, something more stimulating. And in today's world, this mind is constantly fed. Notifications, social media, endless content, all designed to keep you reacting instead of acting. And the more you feed this cycle, the weaker your ability to focus becomes. But here's the real danger. it doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like normal life. You check your phone for a minute, and suddenly an hour is gone. You plan to work, but your mind drifts. You start something important, but abandon it for something easier. And over time, these small moments accumulate, not into failure as a single event, but into a pattern of inconsistency that silently destroys your potential. In Buddhism, desire itself is not the problem. Unconscious desire is. The constant need for stimulation, for comfort, for immediate reward. This is what keeps you trapped. Because every time you choose distraction over discipline, you reinforce a version of yourself that avoids effort. And the more you repeat this, the harder it becomes to reverse. Now, this is where the 90-day rule becomes a battlefield. Because for the first time,
You are not just building habits, you are confronting your own mind. You begin to notice how often you want to escape, how often you seek comfort, how often you avoid the very actions that could change your life. And this awareness can feel uncomfortable, even frustrating, but it is also power. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. And with that awareness, you gain a choice. Every moment becomes a decision. Feed the distraction or strengthen the discipline. And day by day, if you choose correctly, something begins to happen. Your mind becomes quieter, sharper, more stable. And when your attention is no longer scattered, your progress stops being slow and starts becoming inevitable. At some point in this journey, something strange begins to happen. Nothing outside changes, but inside, everything starts to reorganize. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss it. Because the 90-day rule is not just about discipline, it is a ritual of mental and spiritual reprogramming. In Buddhist philosophy, repetition with awareness is transformation. Not repetition on autopilot, but conscious repetition. The kind where you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. This is what separates ordinary effort from real change. Because when an action is repeated with awareness, it doesn't just shape behavior, it reshapes perception. You begin to see things differently. Situations that once triggered you no longer have the same power. Distractions that once controlled you start to lose their grip. Even your relationship with time changes. You stop rushing. You stop reacting impulsively. There is a growing sense of space between stimulus and response, and in that space, you begin to take control. This is not accidental. This is conditioning being reversed. For years, maybe your entire life, your mind has been trained to seek comfort, avoid discomfort, and chase immediate reward. But now, for 90 days, you are interrupting that pattern. You are choosing discomfort on purpose. You are delaying gratification. You are acting with intention instead of impulse. And slowly, your identity begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because you repeated a new way of being long enough for it to feel natural. This is what Buddhism teaches in a subtle way. You are not your thoughts. You are not your impulses. You are what you practice consistently. And by the middle of this cycle, something powerful emerges. You stop asking, "Do I feel like doing this today?" and start operating from a different place. This is who I am now. And once that shift happens,
the process no longer feels like effort. It feels like alignment. Like you are no longer fighting yourself, you are moving with yourself. This is the hidden purpose of the 90 days, not just to improve your life, but to dissolve the version of you that was holding it back. Somewhere between day 30 and day 60, there is a moment that no one talks about. Not because it's rare, but because it's internal, invisible. It doesn't come with celebration or external proof. But if you are consistent, you will feel it. It's the moment where you stop forcing yourself. Up until now, everything required effort. You had to push, remind yourself, resist distractions, fight impulses. It felt like you were going against your nature. But suddenly, that tension begins to dissolve, not completely, but enough for you to notice. You are no longer trying to change. You are changing. In Buddhist philosophy, this reflects a subtle shift from resistance to alignment. At first, discipline feels like control, like you are managing your behavior with force. But real transformation happens when that control becomes natural, when action no longer comes from pressure, but from clarity. You don't act because you have to. You act because it no longer makes sense not to. And this is the breaking point most people never reach.
Because right before this shift happens, there is discomfort, doubt, a strange feeling that nothing is working fast enough. Many people quit here. They return to old patterns, thinking the process failed, when in reality, they were one step away from becoming someone new. But if you stay, something irreversible begins. You start trusting yourself, not based on results, but based on evidence. You did what you said you would do, repeatedly. And this builds a type of confidence that is completely different from motivation. It's quiet, stable, independent of circumstances. And from this point on, your actions carry a different weight. You speak differently. You decide faster. You waste less time. Not because you learned a new strategy, but because your identity has shifted. And identity is the foundation of everything. Money, opportunities, relationships, all of it responds to who you are being, not just what you are doing. This is why the 90-day rule works. Because it's not about reaching a goal. It's about crossing an internal line. A line where going back becomes harder than moving forward. And once you cross it, you don't need to force discipline anymore. You've become the person who naturally does what others still struggle to start. At this stage, something inside you becomes undeniable. You start realizing that what you once called success was incomplete. Because before the 90 days, wealth meant money, status, external validation. But now, after facing your own mind, after confronting your patterns, something deeper begins to emerge. Clarity. And in Buddhist philosophy, clarity is wealth. Because without clarity, even money becomes a source of suffering. You chase more, fear losing it, compare yourself constantly. But with clarity, everything changes.
You begin to see what actually matters and what was just noise. You stop chasing things that don't align with who you've become. This is where detachment reveals its real power.
Not as indifference, but as freedom. The freedom to act without desperation. The freedom to pursue wealth without being controlled by it. Because now, your actions are no longer driven by lack. They are driven by intention. And this subtle shift changes everything about how you operate in the world. You become more precise. You say no more easily. You protect your time. You choose opportunities with discernment instead of impulse. And ironically, this is when financial results start to accelerate. Not because you are chasing harder, but because you are no longer wasting energy on what doesn't matter. This is something Buddhism has pointed to for centuries. Attachment creates suffering, but it also creates confusion. And confusion leads to poor decisions. But when your mind is clear, your actions become aligned. And when your actions are aligned, results become a natural consequence, not a constant struggle. And here is the paradox most people never understand. The moment you stop needing money to feel secure is the moment you become capable of creating it consistently. Because now you are not reacting emotionally, you are acting strategically, calmly, intentionally. This is real wealth. Not just what you have, but how you think, how you decide, how you move. And once you reach this level, losing everything no longer scares you the same way. Because you know something most people don't. You can rebuild. Because now, the source is internal. At the end of the 90 days, there is no dramatic announcement. No moment where the world stops and recognizes your transformation. But inside you, something is undeniably different. And the most surprising part is this. You didn't just change your habits. You changed your relationship with yourself. You trust yourself now. Not in an emotional, fragile way, but in a grounded, quiet certainty. You know that when you decide something, you follow through. And this alone separates you from most people. Because the real gap between those who succeed and those who stay stuck is not intelligence. It's self-trust built through consistent action. And with that trust, your identity stabilizes. You are no longer the person who starts and stops, who depends on motivation, who negotiates with discomfort. That version of you still exists, but it no longer leads. Now, there is a different center, one that acts with clarity, moves with intention, and doesn't collapse under temporary emotions. In Buddhism, this reflects a deeper understanding of the self. You begin to see that who you are is not fixed. It is constructed through what you repeatedly do. And if identity is built through repetition, then transformation is not a mystery. It is a process. A process you have now lived, experienced, proven to yourself. And this changes how you see everything. Goals are no longer intimidating, they are executable. Challenges are no longer threats, they are part of the path. Even time feels different, because now you understand what 90 days can do. You no longer underestimate short periods of focused action. And this is where most people will never catch up to you. Because while they are still waiting for the right moment, you are already building. While they are still searching for motivation, you are operating from identity. And over time, this gap becomes impossible to ignore.
This is the real outcome of the 90-day rule. Not just more money, but a version of yourself that naturally creates it. Not just better habits, but a mind that no longer sabotages its own growth. And once you reach this point, you don't go back to who you were. Because now you know something that changes everything. You are not stuck. You were just repeating. And now, you've chosen something different.